Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to be here talking about some tips and tricks you can use to remember pesky grammar rules. I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about me, and then I'm going to dive right into some common grammar issues and give you some tips and tricks to help you keep them straight. And I know it sounds like an oxymoron there, but we are actually going to have some fun grammar stuff to talk about today as well. So starting out with me, again, I'm Cyndi Sandusky. My most recent W-2 job before I became a freelance editor was in healthcare documentation. I started out transcribing audio files dictated by doctors and producing the reports that are put into the medical records. That transcription changed to speech recognition editing when speech recognition technology improved enough to be used in healthcare. And it kept getting better and better, and I realized that my job was kind of disappearing. My company was putting me into a position that I wasn't very thrilled to be doing, and I decided I needed to find something else to do. That After searching and thinking and trying to figure out what else I could do, because I was very used to working from home and not having to go into an office, and I wanted to keep that up, I decided to go into copy editing, and I earned a copy editing certificate from the University of California, San Diego Extension, and I opened Sandusky Editorial Services in 2019. It says there that among lots of other careers, so healthcare documentation is the one that I stayed in the longest, but I had quite a number of different careers before then. My college degree is in marine biology, which is not super helpful when you're looking in the job market. But I did end up using it in wildlife rehabilitation, so I did that for several years. I also worked in the back office of a mutual fund company. I worked in a crime lab for a while, and I did some graphic design work for a while. So I've had a wide variety of careers and a wide variety of interests, which has actually served me very well in my editing career. I can use a lot of that information miscellaneous information that I've learned over the years in my career as an editor. So as you can probably tell from my varied background, I like variety, and the way my brain works, I need a variety to keep myself interested and keep myself moving forward. So I actually edit a lot of different things. I edit reports for a team of school psychiatrists who evaluate kids for special education needs. I edit for an online veterinary manual, which involves a lot of project management, as each chapter is updated and sent through the different editors and author and back and forth, as well as I actually do the editing on the chapter when it comes back from the author. So project management along with editing, it works out really well for me there. I edit medical legal reports for a physician who acts as a medical expert for the courts when things like a workers' compensation injury happens and there's a psychiatric component of it. My forensic psychiatrist that I work for will actually meet the patient, evaluate them, look at all of their medical records, and then produce a report that can be used in the court. And so I will transcribe that and edit that when he does that. And then my true love, I also edit fiction, and my fiction editing includes fantasy, paranormal, romance, cozy mystery, thriller, and YA. So as you can see, I like variety. But what I found really interesting was in all the different types of editing that I do, there are very common errors that appear in all of it. So whether you're writing a book or a report or putting out some marketing materials, these errors tend to pop up and they tend to be universal. So I have different ways of telling my authors or my clients, some tips and tricks on remembering things, and I thought I'd put it all together here for you. So I do want to make a disclaimer first off. I'm not a grammarian. I really don't care what the grammar constructs are called. I just want to make sure I know how to use the grammar correctly. So I'm not going to be throwing around these fancy terms at you. I'm just going to try and keep everything very simple, very straightforward, and give you some tips that you can use. So what I'm going to do for each of the word pairs or phrases that I talk about is I'm going to give you a quiz. So I know you weren't expecting that. I would suggest maybe grabbing a small piece of paper, a notebook, something like that, maybe a Post-it note, and just write down which ones of the sentences that I give you think are correct. And then as we go through some definition of the words and a description of ways that you can remember them, see how you did. I'm kind of curious how people do on the quizzes. So let's start out with lie and lay. Very, very common. I see it everywhere. It's a challenging one for people to figure out. So here's the quiz. Which one or ones or neither of these sentences is correct? She needs to lay down and rest and lay that letter on my desk. Give you a second to write that down. We'll go into the definitions here. So lay means to put something down. Lie means to recline or assume a horizontal resting position. The confusing thing is that if you look at those tenses there, present, past, and past participle, lay is also the past tense of the word lie. So I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. So once you figure out whether it should be lay or lie, then you can actually conjugate it into whichever tense you need to put the correct word in there. So again, the tenses for lay are lay, laid, and have laid. And the tenses for lie are lie, lay, and have lain. The trick I use to remember this, in the word lay has a long A sound, and it means you place something down, and place again has the long A sound. And the word lie has a long I sound, so I try and remember recline, which also has the long I. So recline or move into a resting position, a horizontal position. So back to our original questions here. The first one was incorrect. She needs to lie down and rest, not lay down, and lie as in recline. And the second one is correct. Lay that letter on my desk or place that letter on my desk. Next one we'll look at is farther and further. Again, my little quiz here for you. I walked further away from the door and plopped down on the nearest empty bench. And I continued eating without tasting what I was putting in my mouth and didn't participate further in the conversation. Which one or ones do you think are correct? I'll give you the definitions here. Farther is to a greater distance or more advanced point, and so it refers to a physical distance. And further means to a greater degree or extent, so it's generally used for a figurative distance or an abstract distance. The way I try and remember this one is farther has the word far within it, so we use it to describe physical distances, how far away we're going from where we started. How did you do on the quiz? And the first one was incorrect, so I'm walking farther away from the door and plopping down on the nearest empty bench. It's a physical distance. I'm moving away from the door. And the second one was correct. I continued eating without tasting what I was putting in my mouth and didn't participate further in the conversation. So further meaning a figurative distance. I didn't actually go anywhere. I just didn't participate any further. Let's talk about I and me. So basically, I'm considering these mostly in the context where they're combined with another name or a person or another pronoun. So let's take a look at these two sentences here. They invited my co-author and me to the book signing. And I and Quinn entered short stories in the contest. Which of those do you think is correct? Now, I focused on I and me in this particular set of slides, but keep in mind that this is also used for the rest of the pronouns. So I corresponds to he, she, they, and we, and me corresponds to him, her, them, and us. So I, or any of the others that it's associated with, is used as a subject of the sentence, or the one doing the action. And me is used as the object, or something is done to it. So me, him, her, them, us, something is being done to them. So the way you can figure out which one to use in the sentence is first, one tip is to read the sentence without one of the pronouns in it. And another suggestion would be to replace we or us for I or me and see if the sentence makes sense. And that'll give you a clue as to which one to use. So both of these questions were actually correct. They invited my co-author and me to the book signing, so they invited us if you use the me and us, or you can just take out the co-author part and they invited me to the book signing. And the second sentence, I and Quinn entered short stories in the contest. We can just take out the Quinn part and we can say I entered a short story in the contest. Or we entered short stories in the contest, so I goes with we. Now, honestly, that second sentence there, while it is grammatically correct, I would typically suggest that my authors change that to say Quinn and I, just because it sounds more natural to the ear when you hear it. All right, let's look at good and well. Our questions here, I'm doing good, how are you? My aunt's banana nut bread is really good. And the editor has her own business and it's going good. Which of those do you feel is correct? Let's go over the definitions. Good means desired, approved of, favorable, or praiseworthy. So there's quite a mouthful there. And well is in a good and proper manner. So the easiest way that I have found to figure this one out is that good typically is used to describe a noun, whereas well is typically used to describe a verb. And good has O's in it, as does the word noun. And well has an E in it, as does the word verb. So if you are modifying a noun, then we are probably going to use good. And if you are modifying a verb, you will probably use well. So let's see how you did. The first and the third were incorrect. We should be using well because it's describing the verb, which is in first case doing, and in the third case going. So we would use well. Whereas in the second sentence, my aunt's banana nut bread is really good. The good is describing the nut bread, and so it's describing the noun, and we would use the word good. To make everything even more confusing, after all, it is the English language, the comparative and superlative forms for both words are the same. So we have good, better, best, and we have well, better, best. So if you really can't figure out which one to use, good or well, perhaps you can change the wording of the sentence so that you can use one of the other terms. So maybe I can change it to, we can say, my aunt's banana nut bread is the best, instead of worrying about whether it should be good or well. Okay, moving on, we're going to talk about peak, P-E-A-K, peak, P-E-E-K, and peak, P-I-Q-U-E. Sound the same, all mean very different things. So which ones of these do you think are correct? The athlete was at the peak, P-E-E-K, of her career. Take a quick peek, P-E-A-K, to see if they're ready. And they threw the book in a fit of pique, P-I-Q-U-E. Which ones are correct, if any? Here's our definitions. Peak, P-E-A-K, is the highest point. As a noun or as a verb, it's to reach a maximum. Peek, P-E-E-K, as a noun is a quick or furtive look. As a verb, to look quickly. And peak, P-I-Q-U-E, as a noun is resentment. As a verb is to excite or arouse. So the best way I can remember to know which one of these to use is when I think of peak, P-E-A-K, I think of apex. Both of them have an A in it. It's at the top or the maximum. And for peak, P-E-E-K, I think eyes. Eyes have two E's, peak has two E's. So we're using the looking or the seeing thing. I don't actually have a mnemonic to remember P-I-Q-U-E, but I think it's safe to say that if it's not the highest point and it's not looking, you'll probably want to use P-I-Q-U-E, peak. So how did you do? First one was incorrect. The athlete should be at the PEAK, or apex, of her career. The second one was also incorrect. Take a quick peek, PEEK, look with your eyes to see if they're ready. And then the third one was correct. They threw the book in a fit of pique, PIQUE. Next one, we're going to be looking at into and onto. Should they be one word or two words? So here's our quiz. Hold on to my hand, one word. I'll help you across. And the second one, she climbed into, one word, the truck with the help of the running board. Which do you think is correct? So the single words, into and onto, as one word each, are prepositions that tend to indicate movement. And when they're two words, into and onto, they're phrases and they're often used as a verb form. So this trick doesn't work all the time, but it's correct often enough that it helps to remember it. If you can substitute upon or on top of in place of the onto in your sentence, the single word onto, and the sentence makes sense, then you use the single word. If it doesn't make sense, you use two separate words. And if you can substitute inside in a sentence with into and it makes sense, you'd use the single word. If it doesn't make sense, then you'd separate it in and to. So how did you do? Honestly, hold on is probably the most common error I see in published books. Well, yeah, it probably is the most common error. Hold on top of my hand or hold on to my, or hold, doesn't make sense. Hold on top of my hand doesn't make sense. So hold on to my hand, I'll help you across. It should be two words. In the second sentence, she climbed into the truck with the help of the running board. If we substitute inside, she climbed inside the truck with the help of the running board, makes perfect sense. So we're going to keep it as one word. Again, it doesn't always work this way, but I have found it to be a good way to try and figure this one out. Fewer and less. Okay, everybody, let's go to the grocery store checkout line. Is it 10 items or less or 10 items or fewer? See how you do on these questions. I have less than $20 in my pocket. I've read less than half the books on that shelf. Your issues are less than mine. Your issues are fewer than mine. Which do you think is correct or are correct? So fewer is a smaller number of people or things, and less is a smaller amount of or not as much of. And the quickest way to remember that, or the easiest way to remember that, is fewer is typically used with countable items, and we use less for quantity, measure, degree, and non-countable items. So in general, if the word it's describing is plural, then you use fewer. So let's go back to our checkout line. Why is this such a controversial situation? Technically, since items is a countable number of things, we should use fewer. So it should say 10 items or fewer. So way back in the 1400s, the word less was used for countable items. But nobody really wrote down grammar rules back then or tried to make people do the same thing back then. So somebody came along in the 1700s and decided that less should not be used for countable items. They wrote it down as a rule, and it's pretty much stuck ever since. So we could argue that using 10 items or less harkens back to the 1400s and it's okay. Or we could argue that the English language changes constantly, and the way it is these days, it should be 10 items or fewer. Or we can just buy our groceries and go home. So how did you do on the quiz? These were actually all correct. And I'm going to explain it a little bit here. So we have less than $20 in my pocket, or I have less than $20 in my pocket. While the dollars are countable, in this case, it's a quantity of money, so we're going to use less. In the second sentence, we're actually not modifying the books here, we're modifying half, so less than half. So less would be correct. And the last two sentences there, while we would think one of them must be wrong, they're actually both correct. It just depends on what the meaning is. So in that third sentence there, your issues are not as intense or severe as mine are, so they're less. Or you may have a smaller number of issues than I do, so it would be fewer. So again, it depends on the context and what you're actually talking about. And if I was to see that particular sentence and it was not clear from context what my author meant, I would get clarification and probably rephrase it a little bit. Okay, let's talk about the comma before the word and. Now, I don't want to get into a discussion on using the Oxford or serial comma here, whether you like it or you don't like it. It can get quite heated if we have a discussion on that. But I'm actually talking about using that comma in a compound sentence, whether you need it before the and or not. So in our first sentence here, they picked up the pizza and brought it to the office. And in our second sentence, the book awards were announced on Saturday and one of my authors won an honorable mention. Neither one of those did I put the comma in front of the and. Which do you think is correct? So I guess I lied a little bit at the beginning when I said I wasn't going to use any grammar terminology. I really just couldn't figure out a different way to describe what I meant without using some grammar terms. So I'm going to define them for you to make it a little bit clearer, excuse me. A compound sentence is a sentence that has two independent clauses joined together by a comma, semicolon, or conjunction. And then I used, of course, independent clause in there, which is another grammar term. So we'll define that. An independent clause is a group of words that contains at least one subject and one verb. So the trick I use to remember whether we need a comma before the and in a compound sentence, if the second part of the sentence can stand alone as a complete sentence, we need a comma before the and. So let's take a look at our questions. The first one was correct. They picked up the pizza and brought it to the office. Brought it to the office is not a complete sentence, so we don't use a comma before the and. And in the second one, the book awards were announced on Saturday and one of my authors won an honorable mention. If we just have the sentence, one of my authors won an honorable mention, it is a complete sentence, so we want to use the comma before the and. I do want to mention this works for other conjunctions as well. If you had an or a but in the same situation, you would use the comma or not, depending on whether that second part can stand alone on its own. So I told you at the beginning that I would give you some common grammar mistakes and some tips to remember them, but I also mentioned that we're going to talk about some fun grammar stuff, and I like dangling or misplaced modifiers. I think they're funny. They're worth a few giggles. I see them a lot, and I do get a giggle every time I see it. So hopefully some of these will bring you to a little bit of a laughter as well, and make you look on grammar a little more pleasantly, I suppose, than you typically would. So the most common place I see a dangling or misplaced modifier is when a sentence starts with a parenthetical phrase or a clause followed by a comma, but they do show up in other places. So as a definition, it's a phrase or a clause placed awkwardly in a sentence so that it appears to modify or refer to an unintended word that may or may not be present in the sentence. So I don't really have a tip or a trick for a way that you can remember it or think about it. All I want to say is if you start a sentence with a parenthetical phrase, double check that it's actually modifying the next word in the sentence. As an alternative, if you're not very good at spotting these, let's just hope that you hire an eagle-eyed editor who can catch your mistakes and maybe give you a little giggle by it as well. So I'm going to give you some examples here. While writing a critical scene in the novel, the phone rang and interrupted her. So let's think about that for just a second. The phone is writing a critical scene in the novel. Probably not exactly what the author meant, although it is understandable the way it is written. That's not actually what the sentence is saying. So there's a couple of ways we can fix this. While she was writing a critical scene in the novel, the phone rang and interrupted her. Or maybe while writing a critical scene, she was interrupted by the ringing of her phone. So those are definitely not the only ways you can fix that. They're just a couple of suggestions that, that you might look at. Next one, as a writer, his office is wherever he can set up his laptop. This is saying his office is a writer. We don't really mean that. So a fix might be he's a writer and his office is wherever he can set his laptop. Or perhaps he writes wherever he can set his laptop. I got this one from a traditionally published novel of a very, very well-known author. And it really gave me a giggle as I read through it. So they spent their shift getting statements from the owner of the building's ex-wife, former business partner, and current girlfriend. So the building has an ex-wife, former business partner, and current girlfriend in this sentence. Not exactly what we mean. So a suggestion to fix it, they spent their shift getting statements from the building owner's ex-wife, former business partner, and current girlfriend. Again, that's not the only way to fix it. There are any number of ways that you can think of to fix it, but it should definitely be fixed. The next one, she kept a dictionary on her desk that weighed over 10 pounds. Well, most desks probably weigh over 10 pounds. I don't think they'd be super useful if they didn't, because a lot of the books that I use probably do weigh over 10 pounds and they would just, knock that poor desk over. So a simple fix on this one, she kept a dictionary that weighed over 10 pounds on her desk. One more, the boxer came home after their workout and flopped down on the sofa covered in sweat. I'm not sure I'd want to flop down on a sofa that was covered in sweat. So simple fix here. The boxer came home after their workout covered in sweat and flopped down. No, that probably won't work either. The boxer came home covered in sweat after their workout and flopped down on the sofa. So again, like I said, not only one way to change it, there's several ways that you can do it. And most of these ones that I've listed here for you, I did find in traditionally published books. So they are out there and they happen quite frequently. So I had no idea that these sorts of things actually had a name. I attended a presentation at an editing conference and the presenter brought up the term eggcorn, which is probably a play on the word acorn, which kind of corresponds to what we're defining here. So an eggcorn is the alteration of a word or a phrase through mishearing or reinterpretation of one or more of its elements, which creates a new phrase that's plausible when it's used in the same context. The only tip and trick I can give you right here, if you use a phrase, even if you're absolutely sure you know the correct wording, look it up anyway. How many times have you sung along with the radio and been singing along with the same song for, 10, 15 years, and then you see the lyrics and you're like, wow, that's not what I was saying all this time. That's kind of an eggcorn. Let's look at some examples. A difficult road to hoe. Sounds about right. It sounds perfectly plausible, right? But the term is actually a difficult row to hoe. And that actually comes from farming practices where fields had to be hoed by hand. So they had to hoe the row of vegetables or whatever it happened to be. For all intensive purposes, this is a fairly common one. Sounds plausible, right? The actual phrase is for all intents and purposes. And this actually came from 16th century England. I looked it up. I found it very interesting. King Henry had the power to interpret the laws as he saw fit. So however he intended it to be, that was what it was for. So all intents and purposes. Another common one, hone in on. Sounds very plausible. Sounds like it should be correct. However, hone means to sharpen, like a knife or your skills. It's actually home in on. And I think of a homing pigeon when I try and remember which is which. You're going to home in on something. Next one, nip it in the butt. This is a giggly one. Makes me kind of, laugh a little bit when I see it. In today's world, that's probably, it probably would be the phrase if that actually was developed these days. But the phrase actually is nip it in the bud. And that comes from horticulture, where it refers to the practice of removing a plant's bud before it can develop into a flower or fruit. And the reason they do that is so that the plant can invest all of its energy into growing the main plant itself rather than producing a flower or a fruit. So nip it in the bud, B-U-D. How about a doggy dog world? I hear people say this. I have never seen it in literature, and I kind of did some searching, and it doesn't seem to actually show up in literature, which is a nice thing. But again, in today's world, that's could quite easily be a real thing. It's actually dog eat dog world. And when I looked this up, I found out that the original Latin was actually dog does not eat dog. But in the 1800s, it became a dog eat dog world to indicate relentless competition and self-interest. So that's it. I hope you got some useful information out of it. I hope you got a couple of giggles and can look at grammar a little more fun than you might normally. Again, I'm Cyndi Sandusky. My business is Sandusky Editorial Services. You can reach me at cindy@sanduskyeditorial.com, and you can see my website at www.sanduskyeditorial.com. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. If you would, just please tell me where you heard my name or saw my presentation so that I know that you're a real person and I don't just ignore your email. Thank you so much for being here with me today.